Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with Vince Pope, the composer of True Detective Night Country. And when I'm thinking about the music, one of the first pieces of music we hear in this is that caribou scene, which it just has this kind of ethereal, spiritual quality. There's this chanting that comes to a swell that really sets the tone for what we're going to see in this series. How difficult is it to land on that first piece of music that the audience is going to hear to establish the world?
Um, yeah, I mean, it wasn't too tricky in this instance. Actually, that original piece, um, the second half. So if we sort of break it into two bits, the first part where the hunter is sort of looking over the landscape and looking over the caribou, um, and then the second part where obviously the stampede happens and they run to their death over the cliff. Um, in actual fact, the second half was very quickly established and then it sort of almost worked backwards. I did some pieces which worked really well for the landscapes and for the certain um, sort of more ethereal elements. And actually, Issa Lopez, the showrunner and creator, decided that she said, "Oh, why don't we try that at the front?" So the front was slightly different, and then yeah, it became this sort of the sound that actually occurs quite a lot, with the vocal and the sort of the gentle voices. So it was, yeah, it wasn't that difficult to uh, uh, yeah, it wasn't that difficult to find in this particular series. But I'd spoken to Issa Lopez a lot, before we got started about feel and where we wanted to go with the score, the kinds of things that we wanted it to do, which were sort of, point up the landscape, the spiritual nature of the story, um, obviously the indigenous voices that we used, um, to underpin the location and the sense of place. So yeah, we had a lot of dialogue beforehand.
Yeah, I think Tanya Tagak is on that particular track. She contributed some music here. What was the impetus to bring her on, and what was that collaboration like?
I mean, the collaboration was fantastic. I mean, first of all, she came across from Canada, and we did a sort of just a sort of get to know each other session, in terms of what she would bring and my working progress process. And yes, I mean, her voice, as you heard on the score, I'm sure is phenomenal. And she does things with her voice that very few people on the planet, I would say, can do. Um, so yes, that worked brilliantly. The impetus to get Tanya in again was, this idea that we felt it would be great to use some voices from this place, this part of the world, and some real voices that represented the indigenous people that are part of the story in this show. So it was kind of a natural fit.
Yeah. What was interesting to me about uh, that part of it, the voices that you use, we don't always get actual human voices in
Mm.
scores, so it's wonderful to hear. But in some strange way, it almost to me does conjure up, even though it is a human voice, the possibility of the spiritual or the supernatural in the series, because it has this almost like ancient quality to it, like it's
Mhm.
been here forever. Was that how you looked at how were you looking at integrating vocals in here?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the more sort of melodic stuff, because I think of it in terms of almost two different vocal approaches. There's the throat singing of itself, which is more percussive and much more sort of raw, if you like, and then there's the more ethereal vocalizations that we used in the show. Um, I always felt, and it's funny because even before Issa mentioned about using voices from this sort of time and place, I was liking the idea of using voices because voices, of antiquity or historically have been very kind of, there's a religiosity, is that the word? A religious, a religiousness, if you like, to them. From the very earliest Gregorian chant, through all their uses in religious practices and procedures. So it felt like a natural fit. If we're having something spiritual and they're just very, very emotive, So there's so many places you can go using the human voice. Um, and I think I think actually Tanya helped us go there, from the very dark, kind of sinister, stuff to the more melodic and the more ethereal, if you like, and the more hopeful elements of the score.
Yeah. One of the kind of key ways the show divides viewers is by representing the logical point of view and the sort of more spiritual point of view in the two main characters, and never kind of comes down on one side of if something is happening for real or supernaturally. Did you feel like you had to approach the music in that sense of operating in that kind of limbo space?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I think if anything, it kind of naturally occurred. I mean, I loved that's one of the things I really loved about the show and working with Issa. Because yes, there is that you don't know, there's the two-fired sighting. You've got the Navarra on one side, um, you know, and she's saying there's more to things than science can tell us, and than on the surface of things. And obviously, then there's got Danvers, who is the opposite to that, and it's no, there are no ghosts. This it is what it is. And I think that's it's naturally represented in the show, reflected in the show. You've got these two characters, obviously, and then it's naturally reflected in the music with the kind of the more uh I mean, there isn't a tremendous amount of procedural, what I would call procedural music in the true sense of the word, I think. I think musically, yeah, musically we possibly did land more in the, you know, mystery sort of horror kind of areas. Um, yeah, but that's just a natural, it comes out of seeing, how the script is realized and seeing how the place and the characters, exist.
Yeah. The kind of horror and spiritual area of it feels very like the instruments used to get there are very evocative, I think. Was there a particular instrument or multiple instruments that brought that out for you that you really kind of landed on?
Um, I mean, one of the instruments that I hit on quite early on, and this was something I was sort of researching when I had read the script and just looking at the sort of the place, I suppose. I mean, one of the things I was thinking in terms of woodwind, because you kind of immediately you can have this sort of sense of being literally sort of blowing through the place. Um, and I, yeah, researched an instrument actually called the Fujara, which is like a Czechoslovakian. It's a huge instrument. It's about 2 meters. It's sort of larger than a bassoon. Very big. It's a Czechoslovakian wind instrument, and that laid down a lot of the sort of tonal beds which are going on underneath. Um, and that seemed to work perfectly. I experimented with other things that were not so successful. I think at one point I was sort of looking at using a bowed guitar sound, which again is quite ethereal and quite kind of you can't quite figure out what it is that's going on. You know, if for those people who are familiar to an ebow, it kind of creates that kind of sound on a guitar, but bowing the strings and then distorting them. But that wasn't so successful, I think, because um, if anything, it was kind of a guitar. It's sort of it places you too much in a particular kind of uh, almost in a particular sort of soundscape way. Um, yeah, so I wanted something that was even less discernible. And yes, if you listen closely and you listen to the sort of what's going on in the bass area of the score, you'll hear this Fujara, which yeah certainly was very successful.
Well, the soundscape feels very of nature to me and of the actual setting of the Alaskan ice. Was that a major piece of where you approach the music from?
Well, definitely. I think because of the show itself and how it's set, I think yeah, it felt very natural to have a score that wasn't kind of overtly electronic or it had to feel organic, I suppose is probably the word. Um, and that I think comes from the voices as well as all the other arrangement, that goes behind that. So yeah, I think that was definitely a very natural fit. Um, it's beautifully shot. And I remember getting the rushes and seeing some of the assemblies, and it's oh my God, this is an amazing, crazy place. Which of course, for our intents and purposes for the show as well is in night, but in nighttime
Right.
for the whole thing. So it's a very particular atmosphere, and I was keen to try and emphasize that and help it with the score.
You mentioned kind of experimenting and trying out different instruments. So when you see a scene from the show, do you kind of immediately get a sense of what sound you're going for, and then you're off to chase that sound?
I think possibly it's more a sense of feeling. So it's,
Mm.
so if the scene is, emotive, if it's sad, if it's happy, if it's urgent. So I tend to go with, yeah, sort of feelings, I think. And then, yes, I suppose then obviously the sound, I mean, it's, in places it's quite a melodic score, but not always, obviously it's not like a melodic score, like an Ennio Morricone score or anything like that. But it's hopefully not too atonal, and I like, that's something that I'm drawn to. So I try to bring out, yeah, the scenes, what the scene is trying to tell me in a sort of a musical way. So whether that's sound, or whether that's, the harmony or lack of harmony or use of modes or whatever it is, yeah, it's, I suppose, yeah, that all those things come together.
Hmm. And Issa is obviously has so many hats she's wearing for this. Her fingerprints are all over it. And you've worked with her before on Tigers Are Not Afraid. How did that experience help you, prepare and dive into this second experience with her?
Um, well, it's interesting. I mean, that was the first time I had worked with Issa. And we hadn't seen each other for, we'd spoken and sent a few messages over the period of time that elapsed after that. But yeah, we hadn't spoken. I mean, but then I got this call out of the blue, and she was like, I'm doing the next season of True Detective. Would you be interested to work with me on it? I was like, yes, of course. Wow, that's fantastic. Um, and so I think just having worked together, and she kind of knew my musical sensibility, and I guess that's what brought her to me again. We do really kind of relate on a musical level. Um, and so that made things, very, very easy. She knows that how I can want to work in melody, and but at the same time, if that's not necessary, how I can, drain those elements away and be very sort of um tonal, if you like. So yeah, so we it was a natural fit. I mean, I was very, very happy when she called me, and yeah, I was saying, having worked together before, I think it just made things easy because we knew, when we say A, both of us know that the A we're talking about. Um,
Mm. I was curious about something unique about scoring a show like this, especially a mystery show, is that every episode almost ends with a cliffhanger, and the
mm,
music kind of, has to be there to support that feeling of, leaving us hanging. But then in the final episode, you kind of have to, I would think, abandon that approach and find a way to tie it together. What is it like after working on these cliffhangers to then have to end the show musically?
mhm. Well, the final cue, which is probably the longest cue in the whole 6 episodes, I think,
Yeah.
um, was, it was a tricky one to crack because it had to do quite a lot. It starts from Jodie Foster's character sort of laying out what's gone on in the show, explaining, if you like, and then we go to the sort of the big reveal of where the characters end up and where they go. So it's, in a sense, it's quite different. It was one of my favorite cues to score because it kind of covers. It goes from the smallest hint of melody through to something which hopefully is sort of positive and uplifting, but at the same time, leaves a question mark hanging. Does it has to fulfill quite a lot of roles. But it's a good question. I mean, yeah, I think it would be impossible to write a cue, a cliffhanger queue that would work across 6 episodes for all the different cliffhangers because they are also all very different, if you like. And perhaps the sixth episode, the final episode, it's not a cliffhanger in the kind of archetypal sense of the word, but it is a bit of a cliffhanger because it's like, okay, but what is, I don't want to give it away for people who haven't seen it, but there's a kind of question mark hanging there somewhere, I think, um, for the audience to figure out. So yeah, it's a different thing, but no, I actually prefer almost scoring uh as I go along rather than
Mhm.
thinking, okay, I've got to create a bank of music which is going to work perfectly over all 6 episodes. Because in any event, the tone of each episode can change. We end up in a very different place in episode 6 than what we set up in episode 1. So, the music has to evolve, certainly.
Is that a satisfying place for you to live and work in? Is a place with a question mark hanging over it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there can be very, that can be very satisfying. Music that is sort of always leading and asking a question. There can be something very beautiful in that. Um, but there can be something, very rewarding in scoring like, a 3-minute action scene or a car chase. So yeah, to be honest, I like all elements of what I'm required to do. It would be very hard for me to answer and say, which, yeah, is it, do I prefer that? I think in terms of melodic or creating something that is yeah, more melodic, I think I like music that resides in a sort of hopeful place, but not a cheesy hopeful place, somewhere that's kind of poignant and
Mm.
hopeful and and also with a hint of sadness. Yeah, yeah, a cue that you could use, which you could use on a sad scene as well as an optimistic scene. I think that's an interesting place to be musically a lot of the time.
Well, I think this whole series exists in a very interesting music place. So thank you, Vince, for joining me and discussing True Detective Night Country. For everyone out there, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. Stick with us the rest of the season. Thank you so much, Vince.
Thank you, Sam. Cheers.